Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Tammy Kernodle, who serves as faculty at Miami University in musicology and also is the past president of the Society for American Music. We'll talk about a lot of the other work that she does. Tammy, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yes, no, so, and I, of course, have been very, very lucky to be able to have participated on some panels with you in the past and also just know of your extraordinary work. And obviously as a musicologist, and you've really obviously focused on African-American music, classical, popular, jazz, et cetera, women in music. And I just thought I would start us off before we get into a kind of key festival that I want to talk about, which is in partnership with the new World Symphony, one of our phenomenal creative partners who is co-curating this episode. But I thought we'd start just with this big picture of, as you think about, you know, all of the extraordinary music composers, musicians, repertoire in kind of our world and in our field. All too many people aren't aware of contributions of women composers, of composers of color, et cetera. If there were any kind of key things that you might say, you know, here's either something people should be looking into more and really just make themselves more aware of, or here's a particular composer or two that I'm like, you know what? Too many people don't know of this extraordinary person's contributions, et cetera. Is there any kind of big picture things that you would want our audience to know?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things and what has really been the focus of my work in the last few years is really illuminating for people the expansive definition of what Black music means. You know, we hear the terminology Black music, and oftentimes we tend to focus that on particular genres and particular sounds. So we only want to look at jazz, or we only want to look at hip hop, or we only want to look at gospel music. And those things are fine, but they only represent one part of our sonic identity as people derived from Africa, you know. And so one of the things that I really have been trying to illuminate a lot in my work in the classroom and as a scholar and as a consultant with arts organizations is, you know, the aspects of Black music that fall outside of that particular rubric, and that being art music. You know, there are so many significant representations of our experience that even move beyond the typical things we think sonically as Black music that come out of that genealogy of concert music, both in Europe and America. And so I'm really trying now to trumpet that even more, to get people to really start to listen to classical music and to listen to Black music with a wider consciousness and with a more deliberate way of listening. So Margaret Bonds in particular is someone I have really been working on in the last few years. But also I've been collaborating with some contemporary composers. And so, you know, the collaboration between historian, composer, you know, writing liner notes, talking to them about their work, trying to contextualize them. So I'm also focused on writing the history in real time, because unfortunately we don't have Margaret Bonds or Florence Price or William Dawson or William Grant Steele or any of these other people. So, you know, we have to go back and try to recreate. And so one of the things that I'm trying to get others within my field to think about, and also composers, is about developing relationships where we can write this narrative now in real time, and we don't have to wait until decades later, and sometimes when people are no longer present, to try to, you know, recreate what was this creative process or what was this composer thinking at this point in time when they were writing this particular piece.
Wow, absolutely. And just a quick follow up on that. I only learned of, you mentioned William Grant Still, right? Literally, I was in a lesson in college, right? Up until that point, had no idea any Black classical composers, right? And as a violinist trained in board, since I was 5 years old, not until I was in that college lesson did a teacher pull, William Grant Still suite for violin and piano right off his shelf, and then opened up my mind to all of this other music. As you think about this, in addition to, of course, reaching out and collaborating with scholars and leaders such as yourself, if there's organizations who are watching, right, and a lot of administrators and others who are like, we want to know more and we want to do more, what are some of the best avenues or ways that they can do that, in addition to working with leaders such as yourself?
I think one of the things that has happened that's unfortunate is that, we have separated ourselves in silos. And I mean, I'm talking about the music community, right? And so you've got arts-based organizations, we have professional organizations that service, people like me, like the Society for American Music. And then, we have entities that are working within educational institutions or performing institutions. And we very rarely have these conversations when we come together, and so, arts organizations, should move and operate within some of these professional societies like the American Musicological Society, the Society for American Music, the Society for Ethnomusicology, because, that can help create, I think, some of the things that we want to see from a performative standpoint, from an educational standpoint. That was one of the things that brought me and New World Symphony together. And I think, we're all saying that we're championing the same thing, but yet we tend to work harder. We don't work as smart because we're not working together. We're not having conversation, which means I need to come to you, and say, hey, how can I partner with you as a musicologist and as an educator, right? And other organizations need to come and say, we're going to attend your conference, maybe for a day. And so we can connect with your community. So if we need program notes, if we want to develop educational tools. And I think that's the way we need to start having these conversations on a larger platform.
Totally. Well, and of course, as you mentioned, the New World Symphony is doing exactly that, and reached out and is collaborating with you on this Harlem Renaissance Festival, which I believe is actually called I Dream a World, the Harlem Renaissance and Beyond, which will be featured this season, and looks just truly amazing. So can you kind of share with us how did this come about, and what's involved in the project?
So last year, I had a conversation with Martin Shear and Michael Tilton Thomas. They came, we just had a series of conversations. I'm not sure how they even got clued into me. And they started saying, we want to do something, but we want to do something more than it's the typical, we have this one concert focused on Black composers, right? We want to do something more, and we want to embed it in two ways. We want to embed it into the institutional structure of who we are, and we also want to connect with the community in new ways. And so I'm doing internal programming. So I've done a series of lectures laying out the very diverse soundscape that makes up the Renaissance, what the Renaissance was, internally with their staff and their fellows. So, we've been commiserating in that way. And I'm also helping them curate this week-long series of concerts. And so, we're exploring every facet of the Renaissance, not just Harlem, but Chicago. We're looking at Europe. We're looking at DC. We're connecting to all of these different geographical spaces that were representative of the Renaissance ideology, but also produced art that was reflective of a lived Black experience in those places. So these concerts, you're going to hear gospel, you're going to hear art songs, you're going to hear chamber music, you're going to hear orchestral music, so it's a full swath of music, art, poetry, the actual visual art. So we're bringing in all the aspects of what the movement is.
Wow. Wow. Well, clearly I'm going to be spending time in Miami in February. So
nothing wrong with that. You know, you in Detroit, I'm in Cincinnati. It's probably going to be snowing.
Exactly. So this is, I mean, first of all, it's amazing. And what I love, that first part that you were mentioning about the two components, that yes, the curation of the festival itself, which I'd like to talk a little bit more about, but this also embedding into kind of the DNA of the organization. I love that. And of course, the approach of let's just not do a one-off, et cetera. And just sort of, can you give us kind of an example of, you said you kind of, a series of lectures really internally, so that their own team will not only have, kind of this one experience of the festival, but they'll have this knowledge now and understanding base moving forward, so that hopefully all of the programming moving forward of the organization is impacted, which I love. But could you, for any, especially, I think, some of our, additional partners and audience out there are probably like, how can we potentially replicate or do this? So I was curious, kind of a sense of, what those lectures are like, or just an example of one of them.
So I've done 2 lectures so far. I've got a few more to do. Each lecture is focused. So my first lecture was really a foundational kind of exposition of what the movement was. And so I talked about the ideology behind the movement, the intellectuals, and I set up, kind of the social factors of America. And so, that were taking place at that time, and really talking about the chronology of the movement, the mythologies of the movement, and how so much of our literature is focused on the literary aspects of the movement. So our general public understanding of the Harlem Renaissance is really framed around what happened in a literary movement that really kind of came into being about 1919, but really, kind of reaches its zenith and begins to decline around 1935, but that doesn't correlate with what were these other aspects of the, this arts movement. And just saying, while we know the literature, the poetry and the short stories and Langston Hughes and Zora Neale Hurston, we oftentimes don't know the music. We don't equate the music with that. And so, I use a lot of geography. So I use a lot of images. There's PowerPoint, there's interactive kind of engagement that takes place, because what I'm also trying to situate is how is this growing out of really insular spaces that are created by segregation and economic disenfranchisement in America, and really how people are making something out of nothing. And they're creating not only these cultural and artistic reservoirs, but in some ways, this is also tied to the way in which Black people really shaped and defined leisure culture in America, and how Americans developed such an appetite for Black culture that oftentimes now it is very hard to tease out what has African American or African roots within our cultural, sense of America or American culture, and what is Eurocentric, because of so much blending and hybridity that took place in this. So, I focus on particular voices in each space. So in Harlem, we focused on William Grant Steele. We focused on James P. Johnson, and we focused on Duke Ellington. And then my second lecture was looking at Chicago and laying out Chicago and how Chicago was more inclusive. It was less elitist than Harlem was. And so I will tell you, I selfishly focused on female voices. So we focused on Roberta Martin with gospel, and Florence Price with art music, Alberta Hunter with the vaudeville blues, and Lovey Austin and Leo Hardin Armstrong in terms of jazz. And so my thing is to create, these soundscapes and create these larger connections, because my thing is, we know certain names, but do we ever consider who's in their orbit? So, my question was, we know Louis Armstrong, but who was Louis Armstrong listening to? He was listening to these blues women. He was working with Lovey Austin and Leo Hardin, right? So, let's move beyond Lewis and talk about that. Let's move beyond Thomas Dorsey, because Dorsey was important in terms of gospel, but Roberta Martin laid down the vocal sound of gospel music as well as a piano approach to gospel. So,
Wow.
it's historical, it's performative. I'm talking about repertory. So I'm also generating, along with these lectures, they have a playlist. They have materials, that are just there for their use. There's no assigned readings. So, it's really about is being as inclusive as possible. So these next lectures are going to move away from that time period and look at the ripple effects of the Renaissance, first in the Black Civil Rights Movement, era, the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And then we're going to look at contemporary composers as well.
This is just truly, truly amazing. And again, what I love is that this is building the whole breadth of not just the festival, but also the capacity of this arts organization. And so what you're bringing through this collaboration, I think is not just powerful in the moment and for the immediate audience, but also for the field moving forward because of the capacity and impact it'll have for the New World Symphony. This is just truly amazing. I could talk about this for hours. Unfortunately, we're just about out of time, but obviously I encourage everyone to check this out. I think it will be truly amazing, and also see ways in which they can engage and potentially collaborate with the symphony, with you, Tammy. But just before we go, I always, like to ask of our guests who are leaders such as yourself, there's got to be tough days. There's got to be times when either collaboration isn't going smoothly, or, our students and our classes aren't, learning the way we want them to, whatever it might be. And in those moments of challenge, I'm curious, how do you draw upon inspiration or the strength to move past those challenges?
There's a couple of things. I'll be quick. First of all, I do a lot of praying and meditation. I mean, faith is really important to me. And it's important to me because I know that this purpose, this mission, this journey I'm on was divinely ordained because, I was first generation college student and all of these doors open. And so when you find yourself doing this work of the music that speaks to you, that's a blessing. And you know that those things are divinely ordained. I do a lot. I have a playlist. So I have a playlist that I usually go to in those moments when I don't feel like things are aligned. So I center myself a lot with music. And sometimes that even involves playing. So I'm a pianist. So there's some times when I'm really decentered or things really haven't gone well that I'll go to the piano and spend 2 or 3 hours, because music is healing, it's meditative. And even though we work with it all the time, we have to readjust our relationship with it. So the music that I tend to go to as my drawing point is different music than sometimes what I teach or I engage with. The last thing that I do is I try to draw up what I know about the experiences of my foremothers and my forefathers. And I particularly think about the struggles that an Eileen Southern had. I think about the struggles that Samuel Floyd might have had, and I'm aware, I am on a periphery, I'm aware of you and what you have done with your organization. And I think about those who have carved spaces for us, who have been the people who have challenged the status quo and spoke to that. And I say, what did they deal with in 1970, 1985, 1999, 2000, or whenever? And I try to tell myself, so what are you facing that is more difficult than what you know that they faced? Because we deal with people being very nice about their racism, but we know that they dealt with people who explicitly told them what they could not do or they could do. And so I really try to center myself in these ancestral, legacies, because we need to be reminded of the purpose, and I use those things to keep me going, because it's hard. This work is hard. And you, as you know, COVID has made it very difficult if you're in the classroom, So, these are the things that get me over, is thinking about our ancestors' struggle and how they paved the way, and how I see myself as part of that and doing the work.
This is truly, truly extraordinary work. Tammy Kernodle, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. And thank you, brother, for all that you do, your organization. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.